It's ding ding, two men in a ring. We put pride in your stride and a quiver in your liver. You want 'em, we've got 'em, coming to you. Loud and proud, he's the biggest, he's the baddest. It's Mr. Gavin Davis on the Gavin Davis Podcast Show.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Gavin Davis Podcast with me and my co-host, Mr. Dave Bruff. We've got a guest tonight who's come in for a bit of a laugh and a joke and some storytelling. My good mate, Daryl Small. He's come in. He is, Dave, this is the man for gossip. This is the man we want for the gossip. So, a little bit about Daryl. Daryl is the only man in history to tap me and Steve Andrews out with his groin guard. Okay? He had a groin guard, and it was the size of a helmet. And literally, we were going to ban it from the gym.
That's unfortunate terminology.
Yeah, a little bit. We're going to ban it from the gym, Dave, okay? So for all the viewers out there, Daryl, my mate, known him a long time, done a lot of training with him. He's here for us tonight to help answer some questions that we've got. Great having you on, Daryl. If you just want to tell the viewers a little bit about your martial arts journey, then please do.
Yeah. So I started doing martial arts like properly when I was 17, so 2011. I started with British Jiu-Jitsu, so like what we would call traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, but obviously we talked about that, and perhaps it's better to call it like British Jiu-Jitsu for now. And then in like 2014, I started training predominantly with Gav and some other people in like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but also Judo. So yeah, I'm currently a brown belt in BJJ, a brown belt in Judo, and I hold a couple of Dan grades in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and Jiu-Jitsu.
A little bit about your competition background.
Yeah, so I've kind of been like fairly established on like the UK scene. I haven't competed so much in the last couple of years, but before, like pre-brown belt, I competed quite consistently, like once a month, twice a month kind of thing. And then I've competed a few times abroad. So myself and you have done like France and stuff, and we've done Japan as well, and a few other places around Europe.
Yeah, you've done well, mate. You've done really well. So what we're going to do, we're on viewers' questions tonight.
Okay.
We're going to come to you for the first question, Daryl.
Mm-hmm.
First one is, what's the worst injury you've ever seen on the mats, mate?
Okay. Well, I think in competition that's hard to say because obviously you don't really follow up with the opponent, or so like are you seeing people in competition before with like what look to be like broken arms? I suspect I've probably torn a few people's like MCLs and stuff with like heel hooks and stuff. As for the club wise, I know a few people that have had broken collarbones from landing awkwardly. So like they've kind of, when they've gone to break full, like they broke full too soon and bust their shoulder blade and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, not too much.
Well,
That's
I've seen quite a few, but one that springs to mind for me, which is the worst one I've seen recently, was 2 years ago when I was out in Cyprus. There was like a beach camp, and I couldn't. So it was like Monday to Saturday, but I couldn't get there the beginning of the week because of work. So on the Saturday, on the last day, they were doing like an open competition. So I thought, right, I'll go up there and get some matches in. And me and Jackie drove across the island, got up there, and first fight went on. So I started warming up because I was on like third or fourth.
okay.
And then there was two girls that went on the second match, and this girl took the other girls back. There was a bit of a weight difference, and she went to take her down. The foot was planted, and she went through her leg.
Okay.
And it just went off like a gunshot, snapped her tib and fib. So that is definitely the worst one I've seen in a long time. It was a real bad one.
Yeah.
Took about an hour and a half for the ambulance to come, and then in the end, everyone just knocked the session on the head.
Yeah.
So I drove across the island, watched one fight, saw that injury, and then drove back, which was unfortunate. But these things happen.
Yeah.
So anything off you, Dave?
I mean, fortunately, touch wood, I've not seen anything quite as bad as that. I've seen minor stuff, and I've heard of bad injuries, but I'm lucky, guys, that I've not seen anything serious.
Yeah, I think that we need to give a lot of respect to a lot of the martial arts, judo, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, Thai boxing, all these different things. Realistically, how safe they are, and injuries are minimal. When I think of how much time I've spent on the mats and you two have spent on the mats, and these injuries are few and far between. So,
yeah, definitely.
Dave, I'm going to come to you next. Question number 2. This is off Rob Sadler. In what order do you find the most difficult opponent? BJJ, Judo, or British Jiu-Jitsu?
Okay,
So
are we
difficult opponent to fight against?
are we talking? I guess there's two parts, Gav. Are we talking standing or on the ground?
Let's go. He hasn't specified that, but let's go grappling.
Okay.
Because realistically, the first 2 are grappling arts, and the third one with the British Jiu-Jitsu, they do a little bit of everything. So let's go grappling, mate.
Okay. Well, I think obviously the rule sets are different, and they have a different emphasis on, judo. When you're developing groundwork in judo, it has to be rapid, it has to be intense, and you have to develop something quickly, or it goes back to standing. So, they're relatively short-lived on the ground, although, as long as you're developing something, it can continue. Whereas in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's really very highly developed. And I think, obviously, technically, there's a massive advantage on the ground in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think in British Jiu-Jitsu, it's not developed to the same extent as either of those. I think partly because British Jiu-Jitsu is so vast, you're trying to cover so many different things, you can't really develop as much in these particular aspects. So I would say the toughest people on the ground are BJJ, then Judo, then British Jiu-Jitsu. But I would say that, and Gav, we talked about it previously as well, there are some Judo players who are exceptionally strong on the ground as well. So you can come across people in Judo who are really good, have a really strong ground game.
Definitely. Daryl?
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think if I had to rate them, it'd probably be a similar order. However, like if a judo guy pins you, that can be like really, really difficult to deal with. And weirdly enough, because I guess because I specialize in like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm kind of used to like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people, so like how they fight. So when I come against like judo guys or like British Jiu-Jitsu guys, they do things that I'm not expecting. I'm like, well, a BJJ guy wouldn't probably give me that same response. So that can kind of catch me out sometimes. I'm like, I wouldn't have done that. And yeah, so sometimes that can be difficult.
I would say to get to the ground, the first component, gripping up and taking the opponent down, the science behind that's really well developed in judo, and that's obviously where 70% of a judo player trains is standing. So getting to the ground and getting an advantage, and like you say, if a judo player pins you, they could get a very strong advantage starting from a standing position. What do you think, Gav?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think there are judo players out there that are a nightmare on the floor. They've got great base, great positioning, great grips. I find that if I can keep a judo player in my guard, 9 times out of 10, I always feel okay. Like Daryl said, if they get that judo side control, that kezakatami, then it does become a problem. They are very good there. That's like their baby. A lot of them are quite good at arm bars. You know what I mean? They're after that fast, quick submission, exploding on an arm. It's not like they're going to wear you down and positionally outdo you. So I think it's quite easy to understand what their game is. However, some of them are very hard. It's very hard to deal with their game. You know what I mean? Especially if they get that judo side. I think that there's a massive lack of understanding of leg locks there. So, for example, if if Daryl started engaging in leg locks with a judo player, most of them will get totally lost in that engagement. Whereas a lot of BJJ lads, especially higher grades who train a lot of leg locks, would be able to maybe deal with it better. Not saying they wouldn't get tapped, but you know what I mean? I like leg locks. I train a lot of leg locks. I don't know many judo players that do like leg locks. So that's more of a that's more of a specific martial art requirement for the rules, because they don't look at that when they're playing judo. As far as British Jiu-Jitsu goes, I just feel that they don't do enough of it, good quality level grappling, to become good at it. Okay, so because of the lack in time invested, they're never going to be able to compete with a judo player, or a legit BJJ guy, neither, because of the lack of time invested. So, like, I think there's more British Jiu-Jitsu clubs out there now that are cross-training a lot more, and the development is improving. But against the judo, black belt in judo, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you know what I mean? You've got to invest a lot of time to be able to compete with that. So I would agree with you, Dave and Daryl. BJJ, I would go judo and British Jiu-Jitsu, but that's not taking anything away from judo players and British Jiu-Jitsu, that some people can be a nightmare, especially if they've got a good base.
I think,
Everyone
I mean,
agree, yeah?
yeah, definitely. Just a comment. I don't, I mean, I'm talking about, I do club level training, but I think as you go through, as you get much higher level, and I'm quite sure, your Olympic level players are probably cross training. They probably, if they might even be black belts in BJJ as well as judo. They're full-time athletes. So I imagine there'll be judo levels out there that, and BJJ levels. You've probably got the same BJJ guys that are cross training high level judo. So
yeah,
they're quite complementary in that respect.
And that becomes a massive problem, Dave. That becomes a massive problem for you then when there's a lad down South Morton now. He's a black belt in judo. He's a blue belt in BJJ. He's 84 kilo. He's so explosive. There's not an ounce of fat on him. He is a nightmare to deal with. Once he gets 5 or 6 subs that he gets good at, that's all he'll need. He won't need 1,000 moves. Just 5 or 6 good subs that he gets good at. He is going to be an absolute nightmare. Because his judo game's ridiculous. His base on the ground, and as I say, his athleticism's through the roof. So he doesn't need a lot. Just needs fine-tuning and 5 or 6 good subs. Anything else on that question? So that was off Rob Sadler.
Yeah. I think the only other thing to mention is obviously, like, that's obviously if we're just sticking to the ground. I think then if you take like the average BJJ guy and say right now you're doing stand up with the judo guy, I feel like then it obviously gets reversed. Then you're probably thinking judo is gonna take that one.
Okay, we're gonna go with Dave first for number 3. So this is off Steve Andrews, good mate of mine, and Daryl's actually. Over time, have you had to adjust your game due to age? If so, what changes have you made? So then he's put later on in the question, he's starting to get to the point where younger guys have the edge these days. I'm no longer the fastest guy on the mats or the fittest, and I'm finding it hard to alter the way I grapple a lot. So the question, going back to the question, over time, have you had to adjust your game due to age?
I think it's a really good question. I think I've got more serious about jiu-jitsu the older I've got. So I've focused more. So I'm trying to increase my level as I'm getting older. But I definitely strength, endurance, speed, explosive speed definitely diminishes. I'm 47 now, and I think even going from 40, I started to notice a drop physically from 40 on, and I'm basically training all the time when I'm not on the mat. Even during the week at home, I've got routines to try and keep fit and strong, just to try and try and tread water almost in terms of fitness and endurance. So I'm definitely having to work a lot harder. In terms of I think in terms of game, I'm still developing my ground game. And I guess I just have to pace myself. But I think my answer, Gav, it's not a very clear one, because I think I've got more serious about training and developing as I'm getting older. So I wasn't high level grappler 20 years ago, and I'm trying to navigate things that I've lost. I think probably you boys will be, or Daryl might be too young, but maybe Gav, you're getting to the point where you could give a perspective on that, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll go to Daryl next.
So yeah, I feel like my game has probably evolved along those lines. It's definitely not been like a conscious effort. Like I'm getting older, so I'm thinking about it. I guess I do feel that now that I'm getting closer to the 30 mark and entering the masters divisions, that some of like the 21-year-olds, I don't know, that it's a different kind of speed and stuff. Yeah, I guess I haven't really had to consciously think about it yet. So.
Mm.
Can I just come back just because you
Go on, mate,
mentioned
yeah.
masters? So I'm going through. I've been doing judo the last few years, as Gav knows, and I'm getting to the point now where I'm going to start competing for points to go for the downgrade. Now I know that if I compete against a 21-year-old, it's going to be bad news for me. So I'm looking at the masters events. So I'm accepting that, okay, this is where I'm going to have to try and get my points against people who are the same age, basically, or similar age, and trying to avoid the explosive 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gav.
No, it's all right, mate. Yeah, to answer this question, I feel that the last year or two that I've started slowing down. So I feel that even though the intensity slowed down, I feel that sometimes I get better quality sessions. So I'm training a lot smarter now than harder like we used to years ago. And I find that I pick up a lot of injuries more now. Whereas in my 20s, I don't ever remember being injured. Yeah, I'd take a knock, I'd be back on the mats next morning. Whereas 3 weeks ago, I pulled my shoulder. I was in bed last night, my neck was hurting me. So I do feel more like my body's starting to feel knocks and bumps and different stuff. I've got a lad down South Morton now. He's a purple belt. Is he better at jiu-jitsu than me? No, he's not, right? He's a little bit heavier than me. He's about 67 kilo, but he doesn't stop, right? He doesn't stop, right? Technically, he's okay, but as I say, he's just his endurance is off the scale, right? And I think he's probably 20, 21. And what I've started doing, I just try and use my experience, and I just try to like use my technique better in certain spots, slow things down. If I'm in the gi, get the Brabo grip in, get the worm guard in, get a guard, slow everything down, get good control points. Whereas if I get in a scramble with him, I lose the scramble. You know what I mean? He's that quick, and he can do that 5-6 minutes into a round. So I just try to be more switched on here and utilize the experience gained over the last 10, 15, 20 years in certain spots. Then there's other roles where I find that I've still got the edge in cardio and I've still got the edge on a little bit of speed. So I'll utilize it in them rounds. So for example, last Thursday night when I was training, we had 3 purples on the mats, number of white belts. So when I went with the white belt, I got my active recovery with a white belt. I was still working on something, but I wasn't working as intense. And then when I was with the purple belt, I was able to really go for that 5-6 minutes. I wasn't coming into that round fatigued. And then I was going back with a white belt. And then I was able to get a couple of minutes recovery and practically not getting pushed. So if you want competition rounds, they're not good for competition rounds. Okay. But you got to remember, a lot of these lads are 20 years younger than me. So, and I know how intense some of them purple belts are pushing me. And it's not a technical thing. It's just an endurance thing. It's a pace thing. So I'm making sure I'm coming in a little fresher so then I can work my technique better. So anything to add to that, lads?
No, I don't think so. I feel like you're saying, you're picking up injuries a lot more. I feel like my recovery time has slowed down.
Yeah.
quite a lot. Like if I get injured now, it's definitely lasting longer, and I'm struggling to do, like, we used to train like 6-7 days a week kind of thing, multiple times a day, and I don't feel like I can do that anymore.
No, I can't do double sessions no more. So on Wednesday night, I've got to go up to Lincoln because it's RAF training this month. Go up and see Paddy and all the lads. And when I do a double session on that Thursday, especially in the winter when it's cold, we all get on the mat at 9 in the morning and we finish at 11, 11:15. Then we'll break for lunch. Me warming back up at 1:30 to do an afternoon session for 2 hours kills me. 10 years ago, that would never have bothered me. It absolutely kills me. So I like now to get one really good session in a day, even if it's a 2 or a 2.5 hour session, a good, hard, solid session. And then the next day I can train. But to do 2-3 sessions a day, nah. It really takes it out of my body. Right, happy to move on, lads, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so number 4, this question's for me. Who do you think the GOAT, the greatest of all time, is in MMA, and why? I have this debate in work with the lads all the time. So, a lot of people will say John Jones. John Jones has just come back. He's just had another good win. John Jones' record on paper is the best ever. However, I don't feel that John Jones, because of the issues he's had off the mat, I don't feel that John Jones is the best representation for MMA as a professional. So I wouldn't go John Jones. I don't feel Khabib defended the belt enough. I think he only defended it 3 times. So even though on paper Khabib's record was 29-0, which is a fantastic record, I would have liked him to have defended the belt 10, 12, 14 times, like other people. So I wouldn't say Khabib for that reason. So that leaves me 2, Anderson Silva. I think Anderson Silva is the second best of all time. I think his fights were so entertaining, and what he brought to the table with the striking and his actual excellence on the ground, you know, the execution of his technique on the ground was really good. But I think overall, the best representation for MMA as a professional is GSP. I think that GSP lost 2 fights in his career. When he came back from them 2 fights, he always bounced back really well and won his rematches. I think he defended the belt 13 times against world-class opposition. And then he came back years later after retirement and fought Bisping. Went up a weight category and he won that fight against Michael Bisping as well. So to answer the question, I would go with GSP, which is my favorite of all time. And I know my wife loves him as well because she thinks he's really hot. Okay, so yeah, we'll go GSP with that one. All right.
Do you think, how much do you think, so when Anderson Silva got knocked out, was it Chris Weidman, the first one?
Yeah, he did, yeah. And then he broke his leg in the rematch.
Yeah. How much do you think that initial knockout changed the trajectory of his career? Do you think if he'd not been like overly flamboyant and if he'd not taken that, because I think that first one was a fluke. Like he's messing around too much, didn't respect him enough, got clipped, and then he's never really come back since then. Really,
no. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. I think when he got knocked out in that first fight, I think he was about 37 then. So you've got knocked out, then you rematch, and then you break your leg, and then he has to have a year or year and a half off, and then you start approaching 40, and in that year and a half, the competition's elevated.
Yeah.
So it's always hard to recover from that. I totally agree in that statement, what you've just made. I think if he goes and wins that fight, Anderson Silva, and then he goes on, does another 2 or 3 fights and wins them, then not so much his legacy. I think he's got a great legacy, mate. But I think his record and what people will remember him for would have been so much more. Whereas a lot of people remember he snapped his leg against Weidman.
Mm-mm.
You know what I mean? I'm not on about the hardcore fans. I remember him coming on the scene and knocking out Chris Lieben. Yeah. And I remember all them great fights that he had, when he choked out Dan Henderson, and stuff like that. But I think a lot of fans who have come on the scene since the McGregor era, will only remember him for, he's the one who snapped his leg, didn't he, against Weidman? Where really he shouldn't be remembered for that, because you go back and watch that front kick he did to Belfort, how he took out Forrest Griffin, some great memories there, some great fights. But I do think that knockout, he was playful in that fight. Weidman caught him. And I think he'll look back in years to come and think he should have been a bit more serious, a bit more switched on in that fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, question number 5. So the three of us are gonna work through this one, because this is a question off Dave Jones from Wings Bushido, and it's an interesting question. So what I've done, the question was about 18 foot long. All right. So what I've done, I broke it down into 3 questions when I've read through it and digested it. So the first question is, and I just want the viewers at home to understand, or the people following the podcast, that this is regarding British Jiu-Jitsu and the BJJA GB competition scene. Okay. So the first question is, Gav, what's your thoughts on the striking to the ref's counter system? Do you think they are consistent through the day's competition? So just so everyone understands out there, the judges, there'll be 3 judges on the mat and there'll be a referee. And the judges, what they do, they've got a little counter system. So when you walk in a nightclub and they click it to see how many people go in the nightclub, it's very similar. So what they do, when you're sparring, the first minute of the match is stand-up sparring. If you land a clean strike, the judges will give it a click. So if I'm fighting Daryl, I'll be on the right hand. Daryl will be on the left every time he gets our strike. And then at the end, they'll go to the score to see who got the most strikes on top then of the randori and the groundwork. Okay, so we're going to come to Dave first.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's a tricky system. I think, first of all, it's an approximation, and I think when you've got a clicker in either hand and you've got punches coming in from either opponent, I think it's probably quite easy to overscore or underscore techniques. I think the interpretation of what a clean technique is, because again, it's non-contact or semi-contact, so one coach's interpretation of what a clean technique is might be different to another's, and you might have somebody racking up so many points for techniques that you might think are non-scoring. You could be out of sight by the time you get to the next part of the competition. But I guess I'm not. Do you know? I was thinking while we were talking before, Gav, about this question. I think it would be really useful to have somebody like John Idle give their perspective on this, because he's somebody who's very experienced in this at judging these contests. He's been doing this for a long time. So what would John class as a point scoring technique? And of course, it might be different what he would do compared to other judges, but I think his insight would be useful in this. But I think it has just as a system, it has the potential to be inconsistent.
Daryl?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not too familiar with it, but it sounds like if it's just like counting the number of clean strikes that's landed, maybe that doesn't account for what's the difference between landing a clean head kick or a clean punch to the stomach.
I don't think there is. I think they both score the same, as far as I understand it.
That from what I've read, that seems to be the case.
So I've got an opinion on this. So when I did the nationals last year, obviously there's 3 elements, right? So when I was in the semi-final, I lost on points. And when you watch the fight back, obviously the way I I don't spar with a long range guard. I keep my hands up tight. Keep my chin down because I don't, from my MMA days, keep nice and tight. And out of the 3 fights I had, I counted 2 clean strikes that someone got on me, and one of them's a body shot. Right now, I didn't get taken down. No one took me down, and no one beat me on the ground either, in any position. So how did I lose the semi-final? So I think it's being able to distinguish the difference between a clean strike and a defended strike. If I'm here or I'm here and you hit me on the arms, that's not a strike.
Yeah.
That's not a clean strike. Okay, so I think that's where a lot of people are scoring points where perhaps they shouldn't be. However, I do agree with Dave. We need to speak to John Idle and people like that about that to clarify that. But I think, so the way he's worded this question is, do you think they are consistent through the day's competition? The answer, I think, is no. I think you'll get some refs like me who would be looking for a clean strike to the body or the face, even though it's semi-contact. And then there'll be other referees that will be clicking every time someone throws a punch. Okay? Anything to add before we move on? No?
No.
Okay, so part 2 of this question. So, same again from Dave Jones. I have noticed as a coach, the least points scored are in randori. So I've started working on judo with Darren Dean, judoka 6-dan, to strengthen our club. Is this also something you have noticed? And should all coaches consider this when preparing students for competition? We'll come to Dave first.
Well, okay. I mean, I think just before we were having an informal chat before we started, Gav, a really interesting point was made by Daryl. I don't know, Daryl, do you want to reiterate that point you made?
Yeah,
because I think that's really important for how we discuss this.
Yeah, so obviously before we came on, I briefly watched some continuous fighting, and I think if people are relatively equal skill level, one, like throwing someone is inherently very difficult, but two, also once the throw's successful, they move straight on to the ground fighting element. So by definition, you're only ever going to get one score in that. And whether it takes the full minute and they just go straight to the floor, whether it's over in 3 seconds. So perhaps it'd be better if they had a minute of consistent randori. So regardless if there's a throw, you stand them back up. Because then you could potentially, if you were significantly better at judo, say, then you could have that as an area where you could rack up more and more points, I think.
And I think that's really key. The most you're going to score in that section is 5 points. And then it's moved on. So I think it's probably more important with respect to maintaining advantage when you get to the ground.
Yeah.
So it's not just the score you get for taking down, it's then when you're on the ground, if you're starting from the position you've taken them down, you've probably got a pin or you're probably working a submission, and that gives you a significant advantage. So the points might run into each other there. I mean, I agree with Dave. I also wanted to improve that part of my game. And as a coach, I want to help my students improve that part. But with this competition format, it's the lowest scoring section by definition, as Daryl says. So as a coach, if you're preparing someone for a competition, you probably don't want them to be learning 20 throws. You probably want them to be learning a takedown that they can do effectively and get straight to the ground where they can score many more points.
What's the difference between a takedown and a throw?
2 points. So I think a takedown's 3 points and a clean throw.
No, from a ref.
Okay,
looking at it. I know what the answer is because I've asked Phil Rhodes what it is.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to answer based on what I understand, but I don't understand it. because I think a clean throw is when both feet come off the ground. But for me, I don't understand how you can, I think even takedown sweeps, anything, you're taking both feet off the ground. So what particular throws a referee would distinguish between a takedown and a throw, I don't know. Yeah,
I agree.
I can't really.
I've had this debate, Dave, with Phil Rhodes, because I believe a takedown, right? No matter what is a takedown. Yeah. Whether you trip them down, whether you sweep them down, whether you throw them down. And he said, no, they distinguish it two different ways. A throw is when both feet leave the floor, and a takedown is a takedown. It scores less points.
I guess that's similar to judo, isn't it? Obviously you get 2 different points, whether it's a throw that ends in like a ippon or whether it's just a knockdown to their butt kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of things though that distinguish a ippon, aren't there? There's the speed of the technique and the execution, and also that the opponent lands on their back.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of those is missing, it becomes a wazari. But I think that's a cleaner definition because you know the way you train judo, you're always aiming to throw somebody on their back, and if you achieve that, it's a clean score. It's quite. I think most referees and players understand that. It's for me what's a clean throw if both feet leave the ground. I think that's open to interpretation.
And Daryl, you'd be in big trouble because pulling guard's banned.
Well, it depends what type of judo you do, but yeah.
Pulling guard and attacking the leg lock's banned. Yeah. So you'd be in big trouble.
To be fair, like in my black belt, when I've gone to do like black belt gradings in the past for judo, like I've been told off because like my throws do resemble guard pulls a bit too much, they say.
Anything else to make on that point? No? So we'll move on to section 3. So Dave's put, when it comes to the ground fighting element, what's your thoughts on standardizing the rules to align with BJJ rules and having all refs and judges recognizing that fighting off your back or taking the opponent's back isn't a disadvantage, especially if the fighter has purposely put himself or herself there as they are working towards their strengths? These positions should potentially win the bout, not get the fighter penalized for doing so. Dave, we'll come to you first.
So there's a couple of things within that point. I think in terms of aligning with the BJJ rule set, well, it is a kind of distinct rule set, and it's a hybrid because you're allowed pins, although the pins aren't for the duration of a judo pin. They're like 5 seconds and they're point scoring. And so the rule set's different, and you play to whatever rule set you've got. But then I have seen judges giving people hold downs when they're in somebody's guard, and I'm stood at the side saying, what's going on? And I can only think it's because that particular judge hasn't got the experience of grappling where they are using the guard to then develop the fight. So unless I'm mistaken, and the judge is penalizing somebody for using their guard, which would seem unlikely. So I think there is maybe not the same understanding of the BJJ rules and how people are developing ground fighting outside British Jiu-Jitsu, and it's not filtering into some of the way some of the contests are being judged.
Daryl?
Yeah, I mean, the way it was worded, it sounded like you could be on someone's back and like potentially getting points taken, like the opponent could be scoring points on you. I don't see how that should ever be the case. So that one confused me a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, I think it'd be good, but then you do run the risk of like if someone's just trying to play guard and then it maybe having it so it's not aligned with BJJ forces the action a bit more. Maybe someone.
I think an important distinction is you've got 60 seconds on the ground. So maybe the emphasis is slightly different, that the judges want to push it along. I'm not sure exactly. Again, this is where maybe John can give a perspective on what he's been told to judge. But Gav, you took part in the nationals last year. What were your reflections?
Honestly, my reflections are there's people refereeing fights that don't understand what's going on the floor. Okay? I guarantee to you that there'll be a number of people that do understand, but I don't think it's standardized across the board. So, for example, I guarantee to you that John Idle, after working with me for 3 years out in Cyprus, will look at ground fighting elements now totally different than he did years ago, because his understanding and his knowledge base has like really, really improved. Okay. Phil Rhodes is another one. Okay. You know, he's doing bits on the ground and that. He understands what's going on. So there are people out there that do understand, but I don't think everyone does. So, for example, last year, which fight was it? I can't remember if it was the second or third fight, but I took, I had side control. Yeah. And was going for the pin. He turned into me. I took the back, got my hooks in. So next thing I'm hearing a count. And then after the count, so I've scored for the pin now, right? I've got the back. And then I'm getting told to transition. So all I can hear is transition, transition, transition. So after I've scored the points, so now I've got to come off the back, which is practically the best position in jiu-jitsu, right? I've got to come off the back to go back to the bottom to then sweep them again to come then back up on top, which makes no logical sense. Okay. It should be up to the lad who I'm fighting to escape that position, not for me to transition to a worse position, which is what I had to do.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of people that think that they understand the ground game, but really they don't. And until there's a standardized level across the board, I don't think it would be good to incorporate BJJ rules in whatsoever. I think that if we're going to look at this format to go forward, so the stand up, the randori, and the groundwork, I think that students, instructors, coaches, they need to be specializing and understanding each element of that to put it together so that the students can really expand and progress in the competition environment. Okay. So for example, now, let's say you two are my students, right? And I don't know nothing about groundwork and I don't know nothing about randori. I know a little bit of stand-up. How do I expect you two to progress in randori and groundwork when I'm teaching you 3 times a week? So then that falls on the coaches to improve their understanding and their knowledge base and to keep striving forward for progression, which can then get passed on to the students. And then before long, you have everyone understanding what's going on in different areas, whether it be stand-up, randori, and groundwork, and then it can be standardized. Did both of you kind of agree with me on that, or have you got a bit different opinion? If you have, please let us know.
Yeah, no, I feel like I don't know, what would you say is like the most predominant like area where everyone kind of focuses on like the BJJ, like the British Jiu-Jitsu stuff?
I don't really know, mate, to be honest with you. I think every club's different. I think you'll have some clubs. Dave, what do you think on that, mate?
I think it probably depends on the background of the instructor and what they like, what they're happy they're comfortable teaching. There are some coaches who cross train and try and implement a lot, and then there will be some that don't. Yeah, but what dominates, what scores most points is probably the point scoring at the initial onset of the contest with the sparring, where you can get a lot of points for punches. So you can probably outscore, and that happened to you, Gav, as you mentioned. You were probably outscored somehow in that phase of the contest, which left you confused at the end. You weren't sure quite where the points had come from.
Yeah. And as I say, that when I've watched the videos back, they're not clean strikes, mate. So if my head was back and two and I was taking clean strikes, then it makes sense to me. But you know what I mean? I'm by doing that, I'm defensive. You know what I mean? I'm defensive. I'm still attacking, but it's like a block. Even though I'm not putting my arm out and blocking a punch, I'm still deflecting or blocking a punch using my guard. So I always see that as I'm not taking a clean shot. Do you know what I mean?
I think
but
it
other
depends
people
on
look at it differently. It's not standardized.
Well, and this is it. This is the interpretation of the person who's got the clicker, isn't it?
Yeah. So they're the 3 questions off, Dave. Dave, I hope we've answered them for you. Or as I say, if you've got anything to come back on that, please let me know, mate. Happy to move on, lads, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a question off. All right, Dave, yeah?
Yeah.
Got a question off Cameron. I'll go to Daryl first with this one. How does gi translate to no gi in MMA?
Oh, I mean, I don't really have much MMA experience, so
No. Well, just do the gi to the no gi. Forget about the MMA for a minute.
I don't think maybe if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said not too much. I'm starting to think now that like jiu-jitsu is just jiu-jitsu. So I feel like I'm definitely struggling to go the opposite way. So no gi to gi. I feel like I've got a very no gi heavy game. So translating that to the gi when everyone can suddenly get grips and stuff, and it's lots of like these new guards that I don't really have any understanding of. But I feel like that's probably can be quite quick to adjust that at like brown belt kind of level. And I imagine it's similar for going from people that like exclusively gi to no gi. So if you've focused really good at no stuff like worm guard or stuff like that, obviously as soon as you start, that's going to be like, well, that's a whole chunk of your games that are missing. So that's going to be a little bit of a struggle. But I feel like you'll have such a good base of knowledge anyway that it should be fairly simple to just readjust your grips. So I suspect there'll be a little bit of a like teething period, but I feel like you should be able to go fairly quick. I think probably the better question would be what's the difference between going from sport jiu-jitsu to suddenly getting punched in the face? I feel like that's probably the bigger change, not so much taking the gi off.
Okay. Dave?
I've never actually done no gi, Gav, so I don't have an understanding of it.
Okay. We'll have to do a couple of no gi sessions when I'm about, mate. So to answer Cameron's question, what I would say is that the two are very different. Okay. There's a lot that does translate over between the gi and the no gi. The no gi, I find a much quicker game. I think your basic, your gable grip, your grips have got to be better in the no gi. I think the gi game is slower. It's more methodical. I think your positioning has got to be really good in the gi. And I think then if your positioning is really good in the gi, that translates over into the no gi quite well. I think the no gi, you've got to have a better guard when you're on the bottom than the gi. I think that there's more to. I think the no gi's probably harder when people start sweating and stuff like that as well, which obviously links over to MMA. So breaking people's postures harder in the no gi. Whereas with the gi, you can take a gi grip and start trying to pull them down. Defending leg locks against Daryl in the gi is much easier because I can grab the gi and pull him in. In the no gi, it's much more difficult. However, once I start sweating, it also helps me escape the position. So I think there's a lot of pros and cons to both, but I think that it's easier going from gi to no gi than going no gi to gi. I find that I think you get better basics in the gi than you do in the no gi. Would you say that's fair, Daryl?
Yeah, I felt like, because I did gi from like up until like mid blue belt level, and I feel like that gave me a bit of an edge on the people that were just doing no gi.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd say I'd agree. It's probably harder to go from no gi to gi than vice versa.
Yeah. Next question. We'll come to Dave first with this one. What martial art would you recommend to a beginner? This is from Becky.
Okay, so I think with regards to the different types of jiu-jitsu, I think they all offer something different. But my opinion at the moment is, like for British jiu-jitsu, which is heavy in the self-defense, the kind of kata-based self-defense, I think that is probably much more effectively learned once you have a solid base in a grappling-based martial art. So I would, and in terms of conditioning and getting used to combat, I would recommend people start with either judo or BJJ to get that base. It's my opinion now. I don't know, others may agree or disagree, but that's where my current thinking is.
Daryl?
Yeah, I feel like if you were to do like traditional jiu-jitsu, you probably have to put in a lot more time before you can make that effective than perhaps if you did judo. I imagine if you did judo for a couple of years, you could probably be fairly competent. But I feel like you're thinking more 4 or 5 years before you're going to be able to start pulling things off in traditional jiu-jitsu, I think. But I feel like that's maybe like traditional jiu-jitsu is a bit more accessible for beginners, and maybe you got a bit more of a chance of like persuading people to take that up rather than maybe BJJ's a bit too full on sometimes for some people.
Yeah, what I would suggest boxing or kickboxing, because what I think is you don't need to spar. You could just get someone holding the pads. You can get a great cardio workout. You can hit the pads. You could use it like for weight loss. You could use it for basic fitness. You don't need to be putting a gum shield in and sparring and getting hit. So there's plenty of good work that you can do in boxing, kickboxing from an aerobic point of view. From an actual self-defense point of view, I would go BJJ. I would go BJJ. I'd find like South Morton, they do just a white belt class twice a week. Just a white belt class. A lot of schools do that now. And you can go in, it'll be down as fundamentals on the program. Go in twice a week. And I would look at working on that mixed in with a bit of boxing, bit of kickboxing, where you can hit some pads. Yeah, like I said, you don't need to be taking punches. Just a bit of fitness work, good fitness work, really good. Last question of the day, lads.
Can I just before we move on?
Yeah,
I would also say a lot depends on the instructor and the club. You know, within each of those different disciplines, you can find a good club that'll help you start and will be good for you. And equally, you can find a bad club that could turn you off martial arts completely. So I guess a lot of it will come down to just individuals and instructors and how they run the class.
Yeah. Okay, and the last question of the day: what martial art is best for a female? Let's go to Dave first.
Yeah, so this is my daughter's asking me these questions, and I think probably what I'm suggesting to her is take up BJJ, because if you're a female and you get grabbed from behind or dragged down or pinned on the ground, this is probably the one that will help you most, in my opinion. So that's what I'm suggesting to her.
Daryl?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good shout. I feel like perhaps it might even like open their eyes a little bit. It's like how like it's going to be really hard kind of thing. You're already at like a bit of a disadvantage. Whereas if you go and do these like 3-week self-defense courses, I feel like that cannot often be detrimental because it leaves them with some kind of weird false sense of security. They're going to be able to press some pressure point, and that's going to be an effective defense to something. But I think BJJ might be a bit better there.
Yeah. I would go BJJ as well. I think Dave's hit the nail on the head there. You know, if you're going to get attacked, you know, we had Chelsea Lyons on here the other week, 2-time world champion. You know, I had the honor of grappling with her. There's also other women in the country that I know, like Yaz Wilson. You got Fionn Davis, people like that. Good luck attacking them.
Yeah.
Good luck. All right. So, I would do BJJ. I would, you know, if I had a daughter, I'd want her doing BJJ on a regular basis. Young girl. How old's your daughter, Dave?
15.
15. Okay, so yeah, she's coming to that age now where she understands. You know, when they're too young, they don't understand. You know what I mean? But it's a good age, 15. Yeah, and I think it's good. To be fair, like I said as well, I wouldn't rule out a bit of stand-up, bit of boxing, bit of kickboxing. Like I said, she doesn't have to spar. She can just do the aerobic side of it and hit the pads, work on the pads with a good coach. And then everything else is grappling the BJJ all the way. Someone takes her down to the ground to attack her, triangle them, armbar them, put them asleep. Anything we've missed? Anyone think of? Anything anyone wants to cover?
Not really. I just kind of like thought is like if you were to design like a self-defense school, if you were to start your own school, would you like predominantly teach just BJJ, or would you kind of have it more as like an all-rounder kind of thing?
No, I personally would teach BJJ, and I would have BJJ being like 60, 70, maybe 75% of the school, and the rest of it be MMA.
Yeah.
So there'd be stand-up elements to it. There'd be wrestling elements to it, but predominantly it'd be a BJJ school. Yeah. The judo side of it, I've done a couple of judo lessons, but I've never done enough judo to get good at it. Dave's a lot more, more experienced in judo than me and the people Dave trained with. So, what I would say is with judo is that I know enough of it to avoid certain elements of it, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I would love to improve my judo actually, but it's just having that regular couple of times a week sessions to work on techniques, because I'm always doing the BJJ. Dave, anything off you on that?
I mean, just what we try to do at the club where I'm a coach is the stand-up is mainly judo based, and then transitions onto the ground where we're trying to develop BJJ with Gav, which we think's probably the most effective in that area, and then the self-defense is off the British Jiu-Jitsu, so it's a bit of a hybrid going on, but we're trying to take the best elements of the kind of various phases of fighting, standing, ground, and self-defense to try and just, put it together in a way that works.
Yeah. So really, if you put striking in there, really you're doing MMA.
Yeah.
You put striking in there as the first element, you're doing MMA. So, but your judo is replacing the wrestling because you got a gi on. That's all it is. So what we're going to do, we're going to bring the podcast to a close. Daryl, thanks for joining us, mate. Is that groin guard been banned yet, or what?
It's a bit of a secret, Gav. You'll have to find out if we ever compete against each other.
When are we going to train, mate? I'm going to be training with Dave the end of the month. I'm going to be up north.
Okay.
You get rid of that cold and that flu that you've got.
Yeah.
And we'll get some training in.
Well, I've got like 5 weeks left of university, and then I'm like pretty much. Okay. Then I have a bit more free time to.
So you're down here for another 5 weeks, yeah?
I'm extended my contract, so I'm staying here till September. But
all right, okay. Well, as I say, we'll start hooking up soon and getting some good training sessions in, mate. You come to South Morton with me.
Sounds good.
Right. Thanks for coming on, Daryl. Thanks
Yeah,
for
it's a pleasure to be on.
your input in
Yeah.
the podcast, mate. We'll get you on again. Great seeing you, mate.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man.
Anything
Cheers,
I've missed,
Daryl.
Dave?
No, I just
Nice
thanks,
to see you,
Daryl, for coming. Great talking to you.
Okay,
Yeah.
everyone, if you're liking the content that you're hearing, give us a follow on Instagram, subscribe on YouTube. All our sponsors, make sure that you utilize their businesses. Some fantastic businesses there up in the North Wales area and around the country. So please utilize them for their businesses. Get in touch with them. Okay, thanks, everyone. Good night.
There's a brand new podcast on the scene talking all things martial arts. If you've never seen a podcast, it's a brilliant place to start. So like, subscribe or download to the best thing on the net. Yes, he really is that tiny. Please do not adjust your set. You can watch it on your telly. You can listen on the go. Tell all your friends and family. Tell everyone you know. Feel free to leave a comment. Tune in, give us a share. The only host that I know gets his keys from Build-A-Bear. The Gavin Davis Podcast. The Gavin Davis Podcast. Jump on board, we'll have a real blast on the Gavin Davis Podcast. A captivating podcast streaming straight into your house. He's a little pocket rocket. He's the Welshman's mighty mouse. Great guests and conversations that won't bore you to tears. Thank God he's wearing headphones to hide those grapplers' ears. Gavin Davis Podcast. The Gavin Davis Podcast. Jump on board.